Greetings of the day, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I want to start by saying that I have been hesitant, might be the word, to do this video because it has the potential to get me to run afoul of the authorities. We'll put it that way. And I'm going to be I'm going to be doing as much as possible, or as much as possible. I'm going to be trying to avoid using certain language, maybe even using a little bit of Pig Latin. We'll see how this turns out. To avoid, again, running afoul of certain authorities. So what I want to acknowledge is that I'm really putting my neck out there to do this. And frankly, it's not worth doing if this only ever reaches the same group of subscribers that watch most of my videos. I really only care about doing a video like this if it can reach other people who might take a step back from their biases and their prejudices and reconsider some of their opinions and their stances on this kind of thing. So what I would ask from you, the viewer and subscribers and everybody who supports my work and my channel, is to try and share this video with as many people as possible. And maybe not necessarily on social media, but by email, or maybe directly contacting somebody and say, hey, we've had conversations about this. Here's another perspective to consider on that. So that's the first thing I'll say. Please don't let me take these kinds of risks for nothing. It isn't worth it. Another thing you can do to help out this channel, of course, subscribe and like and hit the bell if you're watching this on YouTube. But also, if you can help support those who support this channel, like Real Estate for Life, who is the sponsor of this video. So Real Estate for Life is a network of real estate agents and those who coordinate that network, who can connect you, if you are somebody who's looking at moving or buying or investing, with a real estate agent who shares your ethics and your values. This is quite a critical thing I've learned from my own experience recently, because as the world goes insane these days, we may want to reposition ourselves or find ourselves in a location or in a community where we feel like we can weather some of these storms with a little more ease and a little more support from our community and our location. So if that's you, if you're somebody who's looking for that, my family was looking for that just before COVID hit. In fact, I think we were maybe anticipating something like this. And so we found ourselves in the middle of a real estate transaction when the first lockdowns hit, and it completely exploded that transaction. And we found ourselves in a position where we didn't feel like we could really trust our realtor, or that he had our best interests at heart anymore. And that's when we critically needed him to be there for us. And we felt like he failed us. And that was not a good position to be in. So speaking from my own experience, if you're looking to do that, make sure you find somebody who you feel like you can trust and who will look out for your interests. And Real Estate for Life is one of the ways that you can do that. So if you want to find out more about them, you can go to realestateforlife.org and sign up there and let them know that I'm the one who sent you, and that way they will be able to send a donation over to my channel. So I recently read a survey result that said that here in Canada, where I live, respondents by a fairly significant majority were in favor of vaccine mandates, which is to say that either coercive measures or just forcing people to get the vaccine was just fine with them. And I get that people are insisting on this. I get that people are really concerned that as many people as possible get vaccinated, and maybe there's good reason for that, and maybe we'll explore some of that within this video. But I am a bit surprised that so many people will go from recognizing the importance of getting vaccinated to insisting that the government should be allowed to force people or to coerce people to get vaccinated, to take a medical procedure that they don't want to take. And I think it's a lot easier for people to adopt this position because those who have not been vaccinated have been characterized in a certain way in the media. And I want to address that a little bit here, because I've read some of these articles about why people are vaccine hesitant, and I've even done a video about that in the past. If you want to check that out, I'll try to remember to link it in here somewhere. But I have found those videos to be just woefully inadequate as a representation of what some of those concerns are that are out there. Most of what I've read just comes down to the conclusion that these people are just anti-vaxxers. They're in the same category as flat earthers. They're just people who believe in chemtrails and flat earth and any other conspiracy theory that you can think of. And predictably, they have attributed or they have projected all kinds of conspiracy theories onto what's going on with the pandemic and certainly the vaccination programs. And so they're just paranoid. They're crazy. What's the kind of language we use to describe people who haven't been observing the guidelines? We call them COVIDiots, right? They're just stupid. They're stupid. They're ignorant. They're prone to accepting misinformation, and therefore we need to use a heavy hand with these people. Now, if that's true, think about the ethics of that. Think about the logic of that. Let's say there are certainly a segment of the population. Let's say they have a lower IQ. They have a tough time interpreting information and data and drawing accurate conclusions from that. They're easily misled by misinformation campaigns. These people are mentally deficient or intellectually deficient, let's say that. If that's true, if there is a segment of the population like that, and that's the reason that they are vaccine hesitant, do you really think the right thing to do is then to force them through the coercive power of the state to take the injection? Do you think that's gonna produce a good that is currently absent from this situation? I would think that if people are struggling with some sort of a disability, a mental disability, that's about the worst thing you could do to them, in my mind. That's a horrific abuse. I would think that a good society would think that mercy and education and an invitation and helping these people with what it is that they are struggling with would be the best approach to addressing that concern. But that doesn't seem to be the direction we're taking. And notice I said a good society would do that. So if we're not doing that, if we're convinced that these people are intellectually deficient, or they're lacking in education, and B, that our solution to that is not to help them, not to educate them, not to solve the problem that exists for them, but to simply force them to do what we want. Well, that seems to me to be a solution of a society that is not good, that does not care about the welfare of its citizens, but rather just cares about the outcomes. That the outcomes are the end in mind, that the people are a means to those outcomes rather than an end in themselves. And I would say that's a reversal of priorities, big time. Now, with that said, is it true that the people in question are actually just idiots? Are they COVIDiots? Well, there's a lot to suggest that that's not the case. In fact, there was an article on a study, on a survey that I recently read about that examined education levels of those who were either hesitant or enthusiastically complying with the vaccination programs. What it found was that there was a bit of sort of a bell curve. On one end of the line, you would see people who were very low in the spectrum of education. So you would see people who have at most high school education or maybe even less. And it found that they were very hesitant to receive the vaccine within that segment. And then as people went towards college educated and bachelor degrees, compliance went very high. But then as it went into graduate studies, so masters and PhDs, their compliance went down again. So what we find is that the people who are most educated, most skilled in critical thought, most knowledgeable about certain things, are some of the most hesitant. So people with PhDs, essentially, were among those who were most hesitant. So I don't think it is accurate to simply say that these people are anti-vaxxers or that they're idiots. I think in the case of the pandemic, something different is going on. There's a reason that people who might normally be in favor of vaccinations for other diseases are reluctant in the case of this particular pandemic and these particular vaccines. So I think it's worth taking an honest look and asking an honest question. Why is it that some of these people are truly hesitant rather than simply stereotyping them as anti-vaxxers or as morons? Because clearly they're not, and they're not. So what might be some of the reasons? Well, I would say that for anybody to take to participate in a medical treatment or a medical procedure, they have to trust whoever it is that is prescribing the treatment, right? You're not going to take medicine from someone you don't trust. There has to be informed consent to a medical procedure. And in fact, there's quite a bit of case law here in Canada, and probably in the United States as well, that set those kinds of precedents, where the patient needs to consent and they need to be informed about receiving certain medical treatments. Now, in the case of the vaccinations, who is it that is really pushing and prescribing the vaccinations? Well, it's the government in large part. I'm not negating the fact that there are medical experts involved in advising the government, but in large part the programs and the decisions to focus all of our attention on the vaccinations as the solution to this particular disease is policy driven and is therefore politically driven. Now that raises the question, do you trust the prescriber? Do you trust the government to have your best interests at heart? Or is it possible that some of their interests might be motivated by partisan politics? Some of their motivations might be based on their own self-interest or the government's self-interest or economic interests or interests that may compete or may be different from your health interests. And I would say that there's a lot of reasons to say that, yes, there can be many conflicts of interest going on here. And there's a lot of things that I could point to. One is just the nature of government itself and the people who we are supposed to believe are in the role of public service. You know, a quick example to look at would be something like how many high-ranking politicians, and maybe the U.S. president as a role would be a good one to look at as an example, how many were significantly richer in terms of their own assets and wealth when they left office than when they came in. And I would say that if you can find some, they would be in the minority. Why is that? Well, because in their time in public office, they were given access to opportunities to build that wealth by virtue of being in positions of authority. And they took advantage of those opportunities. Now that's a conflict of interest in the myriad of ways that they could have built that wealth. So yes, within the political arena, there can be interests dictated by wealth that have nothing to do with the welfare of citizenry. That's just an example. I'm not saying that's what's going on with the pandemic, but as an example, I think we should be wary of politicians and whatever ethical prescriptions or proscriptions they want to impose upon us. I don't think they always necessarily have our well-being as their top priority, even if it is among many of the priorities. Now, insofar as the pandemic is concerned, I think for those of us that have been paying attention, there is a lot about the approach to offering solutions to this massive problem that for those of us that are thinking critically about it just don't really make sense. The obvious case in point would be the many times that people in positions of authority have simply contradicted themselves about the nature of the pandemic, what the virus was, where it came from, and what some of the solutions should be. So let's talk about masking for a second. People in high positions of authority have taken different stances as time went on, and even contradicted themselves as time went on about whether or not masks were important, whether they're effective, whether they should be mandated, etc., etc. There was a clip of Anthony Fauci out there that was circulating on the internet for a while, in which at certain intervals of this crisis, he was giving very confident advice with no questioning, with no ambiguity about his own confidence in this advice, that masks don't help. In fact, they could even cause problems of their own, because they might get dirty, you might be touching your face too much, adjusting your mask, whatever else. And then other clips of him later on saying, absolutely, masks are important. Masks prevent the transmission. They protect you. They protect everyone around you, et cetera, et cetera. We've heard authorities say both of these things at different points in time. Now, some people have pointed out that this is how science works. As information comes in, we make adjustments. That might be true. But I don't think that is how science works. Science doesn't work in such a way that before the information comes in, you can with certainty set a course and give advice out as if you know it to be true, which is what a lot of these authorities were doing at the beginning when they were talking about masks and other solutions and other steps that we could take to protect ourselves. If you don't have all the data because it hasn't come in yet, then don't speak with such confidence and such authority about whatever it is that you think might be effective or not effective for that matter. And if you make mistakes along the way, then concede those mistakes. And that hasn't happened at any point that I've noticed. High-ranking politicians, whether it be health experts, premiers in the provinces of Canada, or the Prime Minister of Canada, or down in the States, whether it be governors, senators, congressmen, congresswomen, or the president himself, whether it be Trump or Biden, I haven't heard a single person at any point say, we were wrong over here, and we're sorry about that. Now we have more information, more data, and we are making corrections as a result. They just carry on as if they've been right the whole time. And those of us who have been paying attention are saying, well, these two things don't add up, and you expect us to trust you about your mandated solution. Well, again, it requires trust and it requires consent. And without the trust, you're not going to get full consent. And the solution to that is you need to build trust. And without the transparency, without the consistency, and without the willingness to say, we were wrong in these other instances where we contradicted ourselves, sorry about that, here's why we know we were wrong, and here's what we're going to do about it to help fix these problems. They haven't been doing that, and yet they have contradicted themselves. And that's created far less trust than building up the trust that is necessary to get full cooperation from those of us who are citizens. One of the other big concerns that might be out there is an unwillingness to listen to minority voices, even though they are experts. When stuff like this happens, we're often told to trust the science, trust the scientists. And I'm gonna revisit this in a little bit, so I don't want to get too carried away with it. But the way that science works isn't about consensus. Scientific truth isn't a measure of democratic vote. You don't get a bunch of scientists in a room and say, who votes for this conclusion about this particular study? And they all raise their hands. That's not how science works. Science works based on who can demonstrate what is true. And often it is the minority voices in scientific history who have been able to demonstrate that what is true, or they have been right even though they are the minority voice. Copernicus and Galileo are two such characters at a certain point in time. Einstein was a minority voice at one point. Georges Lemaitre was a minority voice at one point. And we have discovered that in the cases where they were minorities on some of these unique discoveries that they had made, they were the only ones who were right. That's how discovery works. Discovery isn't usually a scenario where everybody discovers something all at the same time. It's usually one person or a group of researchers who has a breakthrough and are the minority until everybody else says, oh yeah, you're right. Darwin was a minority voice for a very long time until everybody kind of came around to his position. We have minority voices who are very respected in their fields right now, who are voicing their concerns and who are getting censored for it. And that is another way to remove trust from those of us who are paying attention. I'm thinking of people like People like Dr. Robert Malone, who is the inventor of RMNA technology, which is the technology that the current vaccines are using, which is a new and novel technology. He is one of the people who had the breakthrough in developing that technology. He is one of the minority voices who is now, he is advising caution about the vaccines. And I'm not going to go into detail about what his position is or why he takes that position. I would invite you to Google his name and see what he has to say for himself. Another person, very respected, very well-published scientist and researcher, is Dr. Peter McCullough, who has given testimony at Senate hearings, who has some interesting things to say. So I would invite you to Google him as well and hear some of what he has had to say about the vaccines, about the pandemic, and about different treatment options. He is somebody who likewise has suffered censorship for simply presenting peer-reviewed, published science, which is that's the criteria that that we look at to say, well, is this valid science or not? Typically, if it's peer-reviewed and published in respected journals, yeah, that's the kind of thing we can say, well, this is credible, at least, if nothing else. He has been doing that. He is one of the most published scientists in the United States. Some have said he's the most. I haven't verified that myself, so I don't know. But he has been presenting peer-reviewed, published science and then censored for it. Now, if trusting science is so important to us, how is it that we've enshrined the social media tech companies as the arbitrators of what is and isn't science? I don't think they have that authority. I don't know why we've given them that authority, and I think we should be pushing back against that to some degree. Now, on this question of trusting science, personally, I think that's a fairly inane approach to arriving at truth. An analogy, so science is a tool at the end of the day. It's a very sophisticated and complicated tool, admittedly, but it's still a human methodology. It's a human tool that we use to observe and interpret phenomena and then to draw conclusions from those observations. A simplistic analogy might be to look at any other tool. So say you have hired a contractor to build an extension on your house, and he shows up the day of, the day that the work is supposed to begin, and he looks a little tipsy. He looks a little worse for wears. You can smell alcohol in his breath. You're concerned that if he gets up on a ladder, he might not be able to balance himself up there. And so you come to him and you raise these concerns and you say, are you sure you're up for work today? And he says to you, what, you don't trust my hammer? This is a good hammer. This hammer has built many houses. Why wouldn't you trust the hammer? Well, the trust isn't in the hammer. It's in the person wielding the hammer. Our concerns about trusting science, if somebody ever has concerns about science being done or implemented, is not so much with the scientific method as much as it is the group or individuals who are using that scientific method. The Nazi regime committed war crimes using the scientific method. People using the scientific method might be the reason why this pandemic started in the first place. People doing gain-of-function research on viruses that may have leaked. We don't know if that's actually what happened, but for all we know, science or scientists are what got us into this problem in the first place. So this imposition, this expectation that we're going to blindly trust science, what they're really asking for is for us to blindly trust scientists. And I don't think that that's a wise decision. I don't think that that's a good way to live your life when somebody in a position of authority says, trust me because I'm in a position of authority. That's not how trust is earned. And there's not a lot of prudence in that. Now, speaking of the origins of the virus, I would think that if you want to offer a solution to a problem, the pandemic being the problem in this case, the virus being the problem in this case, you would put a lot of effort into understanding that problem in order to offer a sound solution to that problem. If you don't understand what the problem is and all the variables of the problems and the boundaries of the problem, what makes you so sure you're going to have a viable solution that appreciates the full scope of the problem? I don't think you will. And the fact that we still don't know the origin of this virus, and we don't seem to be putting a lot of critical effort into establishing the origin of the virus, that's a massive concern for me. And I would expect for people who are, again, thinking critically about this whole fiasco that we find ourselves in. At first, we happen to know for a fact that the Chinese government was not upfront at the beginning of this. And that's, of course, where the virus originated from. Whether it came from a lab or from nature itself or natural causes or meat markets, perhaps that's still up in the air. But the place of origin, which is Wuhan, there is a lab there where they were doing gain-of-function research on, I believe, coronaviruses. Maybe it wasn't coronaviruses, or maybe that hasn't been confirmed, but I've seen some reports that said that it was actual gain-of-function research on coronaviruses. Gain-of-function means you give it abilities that it doesn't have in nature to become more lethal or more infectious or whatever, and then you study it. That would be a massive coincidence that the place of origin happens to be where there is a lab doing this kind of research on the exact kind of viruses, the virus that is now afflicting us. Before any investigation was allowed to be conducted, people in authority, including health authorities like people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, were ridiculing anybody who suggested a lab leak theory, and were insisting that it came from this wet market and through a natural leap from animals to humans. And in the meantime, social media was censoring people who were suggesting that it might have been a lab leak, or even suggesting that, maybe we should investigate that as a potential theory at this point. Before any investigation was done, the conclusion was put out there and the media ran with that, and anybody who deviated from that narrative was villainized and ridiculed for it. Now there is more... there's less confidence in the origin of the virus, and the lab leak theory is now back on the table in respected circles of discourse. That's a big contradiction that, again, people like Anthony Fauci, as far as I know, haven't conceded, haven't admitted fault, haven't admitted that they were wrong about. And yet we are still expected to trust them as they themselves spread misinformation and refuse to acknowledge that they have been doing just that. So that reduces our trust. It reduces our confidence in the solution when we don't adequately understand the parameters of the problem. And yet, the solutions that we keep coming up with, whether they be lockdown measures, masks, social distancing, vaccines, all of these measures that are coming from the same groups of authorities, whether they be, again, health authorities or politicians, they are coming from these individuals that have not been transparent with us. And so those of us, again, who are looking at all of these considerations and thinking critically about it, you're not gaining trust. You're losing trust from among these people. Another, I think, very legitimate concern is that there has been no cost-benefit analysis to the measures to fight the virus compared to what the cost of letting the virus spread might be. At every point, we've been operating under the assumption that the virus is catching the virus and letting the virus spread and the pandemic spread is a scenario that is far more horrible and unacceptable than anything else that we might do to fight the virus. And many people have pointed out that a lot of these measures have inflicted pain and suffering, economic loss, mental distress, psychological distress. It's been divisive and polarizing and fragmenting society itself, the cost of which we probably won't know until all of this thing is resolved, if it ever becomes resolved. At no point did anybody get up at a press conference, whether they be a doctor or a politician, and say to us, we've done a cost-benefit analysis of this. We know what the likelihood of catching the virus is and the really bad outcomes, whether they be fatal or just ongoing symptoms or hospitalization. We know exactly what the likelihood of that is. And on the cost side, if we implement lockdowns, masks, school closures, business closures, social isolation, 24-hour news cycles where we're just talking about the pandemic in apocalyptic terms, we know that those outcomes aren't nearly as bad as the outcomes where the pandemic or the virus is allowed to run its course in the population. Or maybe even less severe measures that still try to curb the virus, but are not as severe in the way that they have these other negative consequences. Nobody's done those kinds of cost-benefit analysis, or if they have, they haven't presented them to the people, respecting our ability to make critical decisions and ethical judgments and actions ourselves. So with all of that said, let's take for granted that there was transparency, that there is trust, that the vaccines are a best case scenario for all of us, that the benefits of the vaccines and every other mandated measure is far better than the alternative, that we should do these things. The question still remains, should we mandate them? Should we force people to take the vaccines, acknowledging that the vaccines are the best solution available to us? I would say no, for a few different reasons. And I'll start off by saying that for most developed Western countries descended from Europe and European thought and European political systems, most countries like Canada, where I live, are liberal democracies, which means that liberal, meaning liberty, meaning freedom, is ranked very high, if not the highest priority of goods that we are to direct our lives towards. As an example, just to give you some more sort of like a relatable anecdote, when people go fight wars, whether they be Canadian or American or otherwise, when our military goes out and when people die in those wars, when military personnel are casualties in those wars, what do we always say about them? We say as a consolation, they died for what? They didn't die for communism. They didn't die for collectivism. They didn't die for any other system. What did they die for? They died for our freedoms, because our freedom is considered our greatest good in a liberal democracy. Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue in favor of liberal democracy. I don't think liberal democracy is the greatest political system that is available to us. But we seem to, in the 20th and 21st century, have come down to two alternatives, either something like collectivism and typically tyranny, which could be communism, it could be fascism, or liberal democracy. And most of the prosperous countries have settled on liberal democracy. And maybe some history will help to explain why this is. There was a time in European history, and I think that's an important focal point, because again, we are descended from European history, so we have to understand how we got to where we are favoring liberal democracy. There was a time in Europe when there was a common vision of life, where even though people might disagree about their own self-interests, including kings and principalities, which would cause conflicts and wars, they still had a common vision for what was the highest good of the person, of themselves and their people, and they had a common creed and a common culture, all grounded in Catholicism. And so if you want everybody to, as an enterprise of society, to all put their efforts in a particular direction, whether it be a war or whether it be economic renewal or whether it be overcoming the impositions of an epidemic, you need everybody to work towards that common goal. That's possible when everybody all believes the same things and trust in the authorities who believe the same things that they do and advocate for the same ethical theories that they do. But then the Protestant Reformation happened, and that ruptured that common vision. And those ruptures kind of snowballed in through the Enlightenment, all kinds of new philosophies and new ways of looking at the world, including ethical ways of looking at human life and political theories, all started to create these smaller ruptures and divisions within society. And that created wars and conflicts and persecutions of different groups depending on who was in charge. And so when people came to the New World, being places like North America or Latin America or South America, they said, you know, all of those people in authority back in Europe who keep on trying to impose their particular vision of life, we want to be done with that. We want to say that the individual should be able to interpret the ethical options that are out there for themselves. They should be able to govern themselves and make their own decisions to a reasonable degree, and that the government should work for them, should be thereby a mandate of the people, rather than people working and subservient to the government. Now, this seemed like a necessary option because without it, you know, if we're always trying to insist on a singular vision of a way of life, when there are a multitude of visions out there that are persuasive, then you're always going to find many different peoples and many different groups adopting different ideologies, different ethical systems, different religions, and you will always have somebody at the top who is persecuting all these different groups who don't align with that vision. So the solution was liberal democracy, liberty, give people their freedom to choose to say what they want to say, to believe what they want to believe, and to conduct their own affairs with as much independence and as much liberty as possible. And the democracy part is to insist that the government works for the people. The government is there to represent the interests of the people. Now, throughout this pandemic, we've seen a lot of contradicting this notion of liberal democracy. And again, I'm not an advocate. I don't think liberal democracy is the best way to live. But if we're going to say we're a liberal democracy, which we have been doing for, 300 years or so, let's live up to that. Let's be consistent about that. Let's not call ourselves liberal democracy and then go and do something else and violate this sort of social contract that we've all been adhering to. With the mandates and the restrictions and the lockdowns, what we are seeing is these aren't voluntary measures. These aren't measures where the free people have decided to do these things. How do we know that? Well, because the government is forcing them to do it. And the government wouldn't have to force them if they were just willing to do it on their own. If they were willing to do it on their own, then the mandates wouldn't be necessary. If the president or a governor or a premier or a prime minister simply got up on the stage at a press conference and said, here's what needs to happen. Everybody needs to quarantine for 2 weeks. You need to start wearing masks. You need to start social distancing. You need to stop going into public places unless it's necessary. Please do that. Well, if we were all convinced by that, we would do that. But obviously we haven't all been convinced by that and therefore didn't comply with those things unless it was forced upon us through legal punitive measures. That's a contradiction of what it means to be a liberal democracy. And I don't think that that's very tolerable, again, for those of us that are thinking critically about it, trying to reconcile what's happening with the social contracts and the things that we have all agreed to participate in as a society, politically or otherwise. And so that is creating a rupture of trust, again, between the authorities and those of us who are supposed to be telling the authorities how to govern. Instead, we're seeing a lot of those kinds of impositions coming the other way. And that's a contradiction of who we are and who we've agreed to be as a society. Now, maybe that doesn't bother you. Maybe you could say, I don't care about liberal democracy. Let's be tyrannical for all I care, as long as it gets the outcomes that are needed. Well, let's think about the precedents of that. Think about, I don't want you to think so strictly about just this particular pandemic and these particular vaccines. Think about the principles that we are accepting when we say that medical procedures can be mandated by the government. So let's think about some other maybe theoretical scenarios where something like that could be mandated. Let's look at something like the obesity epidemic, which is growing bigger and bigger and bigger. It's snowballing, in fact, over the past few decades. Obesity has skyrocketed since the 80s, basically, and it's exponentially increasing in places like Canada, the United States, and in European countries as well. So, along with that comes an epidemic of morbidity. And we've even seen this with the pandemic, is that people with certain comorbidities, obesity being one of them, they run the risk of being more likely to end up in the hospital or dying from COVID if they are obese. And obesity-related illnesses account for a pretty considerable number of hospitalizations, of medical treatments that would otherwise be unnecessary, and even death from things like heart disease. So what if somebody invented, let's say, a microchip that could be implanted in your brain to curb certain behaviors that lead to obesity, whether they be appetite suppressants or certain thought fixations or certain compulsive behaviors, whatever it is, they have figured out a way to manipulate the brain through technology to curb those behaviors that lead to obesity as an outcome, and will therefore save many, many lives, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. Or maybe somebody found a way to curb the behavior that leads to accidents. Accidents are a massive contributor to mortality and fatality within society, especially among the young. I think it's the leading cause of death, if not the tens of millions of hospitalizations that happen as a result of accidents. So what if someone developed a brain chip that curbed impulsive behavior that then leads to accidents, and said that, we've done studies on this, and we found that it is a sound treatment method, and we want to implant this among everybody to prevent accidents from happening and prevent all of these future deaths and injuries. How many of us would be willing to just go along and say, yeah, stick it in there, go for it? Wouldn't some of us be a little reluctant? Wouldn't you say, well, how do I know it's not going to manipulate my brain to do other things that I don't want it to do? How do I know that there aren't going to be negative, unforeseen consequences, as there often are with doing scientific experiments? How do I know that I can trust the government, who is adopting this and mandating it, that there isn't any kind of a political or a partisan agenda going on here that will take away my agency and my freedom? These are all totally valid concerns. And I think most of us would say, yeah, it would be wrong to mandate something like that. In principle, the same moral principle applies here. If we allow it here, we are in principle allowing it in a myriad of other scenarios that we haven't even considered yet. So I think at the very least, even if we think that vaccines are the best way to end the pandemic, or at least to fight back against it, we should be willing to recognize the freedom, the autonomy, which is, there's so much precedent in law and in declarations of human rights and charters, and I mean, there's so much to defend the autonomy, the personal security of a person's physical body, that they can refuse medical treatments that they may not want. So with all of that said, I will draw the conclusion that no, I think vaccine mandates are wrong, and that we should be far less enthusiastic. It's shocking to me to see those kinds of surveys and to see how many people believe that people should be forced to be vaccinated against their will. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like and comment if you've got feedback of your own. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. The reason I can continue making content like this is because of the generous support of my viewers. If you feel called to support this work, then consider joining the Reinforcements, which is my online community. There are multiple tiers, including free access for those who can't help financially but still want to join. You can join up at www.brianholdsworth.ca. Certain levels will also get a free gift basket from Glory and Shine, who is a family-owned Catholic bath and body products company whose beard balm I'm wearing right now. It's like aromatherapy for your face. Even if you don't join, they make amazing products, so check them out at gloryandshine.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You don't have to agree with everything I said to get value out of these kinds of conversations, so be sure to subscribe to be edified or challenged. There's value in both.